Hi there, Maggie from Knitting in the Park here. Today's video we're going to talk about knitting at a very basic level. What is it? Where did it come from? Why do I love it? So knitting is basically a series of loops which we call stitches. They're live stitches, and what I mean by that is that they are hanging off of a needle, and if dropped, a stitch will actually unravel down through your knitted work. Where this differs from crochet is that crochet is a series of closed stitches. You have generally one live stitch that's wrapped around the crochet hook at a given time, and you work back through those closed stitches to create multiple rows and whatever you're working on. Knitting is a great, some people call it a hobby. For me, it's more of a passion. I learned about 10 years ago, and how did I learn? I learned because my grandmother had crocheted, and I always wanted to pick up a fiber art, but she had passed away, and there was no one that I had in my close life circles to teach me. And there were a few that were knitting. And so in college, I had a roommate. She got me started on it, and from there, I really loved and went onto YouTube and learned many techniques and different skills from YouTube videos. So I've come full circle now. I'm hoping to create some educational content so that you can now pick up the passion that I love so much and that I get so much joy from. So knitting is a series of live loops of stitches on a needle, and the way you create these loops creates the type of fabric that results. So there's different stitches that create different textures. The knit stitch is the most basic, and then you move on to the purl stitch, which is kind of the inverse, and go beyond there. So where did knitting come from? Well, recently, it's really exciting if you're someone like me, they found the oldest discovery of a knitted item, garment, project in Egypt. And it's this really old, funky looking sock, but it's one of the oldest known examples of knitting that we have. And there are lots of other different ones from different parts of the world. So if you think of knitting, often you think of Irish and Scottish sweaters, those beautiful Aran knits with panels of beautiful intricate cables. Or you think of Scottish Fair Isle knitting, where you're looking at the different color works that they have, the combination of different colors in their clothing. Or you get into the Scandinavian knitting, which also does beautiful Fair Isle and Interstarcia knitting, where it's color work, it's different textures, and their patterns. So there's a whole world of knitting that is about to open up to you, and I'm so excited for you that you're about to embark on this adventure. So how do you get started? You are going to need a couple of things. You're going to need a knitting needle. And there's a couple different types of knitting needles out there, and the most basic form of knitting needle is your straight needle. You'll have a set of two, and they range in different sizes, different lengths. This one is quite long, so you might often find shorter versions than this, and they're made from a variety of materials too. So these are a beautiful wood. These are Knit Picks. The Knit Picks makes gorgeous colored wooden needles, and they're a joy to knit with. But they also come in metal and plastic and a lot of different variations. They come in different sizes. This is actually a medium size needle. It's a size 8, but they go all the way to 0. So there's a lot of different fun that you can have pairing your needles with different yarns to get different fabric characteristics. Qualities of a knitting needle. There's always a point or a tapered end here. This is the end, the working end of the needle. And then if you're working with flat needles, there's always some kind of flare or stopper at the edge here to catch the stitches so they don't fall off as you're working and come unraveled. There are also lots of different styles of needles. So you have circular needles, which I'm working on right now. I knit almost exclusively on circular needles. I just like the way the project hangs when you work with them. You don't have all the weight on one end. So when you're working with a bigger project or something that might be in the round, these needles, let me see if I can pull them out so you can see. You've got 2 needles one on either end. They've got the same tapered point. This is a size 3, so it's much smaller than the straight needle I just showed you. And each of these are connected to one end of a cable. Often it's a plastic cable here. These needles are made of bamboo, so also wood, but different from the straight needles. And they're great for working in one direction, or like I said, if you have a larger, heavier work there. When I say circular needles help you knit in one direction, I'd like to dispel the myth that you often see in cartoons and different movies that you can just copiously knit and sit here and knit and you have the work just kind of growing in length as you go. When you work with flat needles, you work in one direction. So as you work, you'll transfer the needles from your left hand needle to the right hand. Then you'll turn the work so that the stitches are now again in your left hand and work on the other side. So this is called knitting flat or knitting back and forth versus knitting in the round, which is continuously knitting in one direction, not changing and working back the other way. So knitting in a nutshell there. What do I get out of knitting? Knitting is a great way to release that creative energy. And if you're someone like me, that energy kind of builds up, and if it has nowhere to escape, or if you don't have something in which to channel that energy, you kind of start to get a little, well, I get irritable. I don't know what happens with other people, but so knitting is a great hobby. It's productive. I have a 2-dimensional art minor, and I never thought I would get into something as 3-dimensional as knitting, but I've left my previous art behind and almost exclusively do knitting now. So if that is any kind of testimonial, yeah. So what do you make? What is an easy project to start out with? When you talk to your local knitting stores, or even your larger chain stores like your Michaels or Joann's, a basic project that they often start you out with is a scarf. Scarves are a short section of stitches worked back and forth, and you often just work that knit stitch, and eventually you have a project. When I start people off with knitting, scarves I think can be a little insurmountable for some people, so you just get stuck in scarf limbo where you're just kind of working on the same project and you don't get that sense of joy of accomplishment when the project ends. So I like to start people with like a lap blanket and a chunkier yarn with a thicker needle, so that you have a longer row to start with, so you have a larger number of stitches that you're working with in the row, and then you go back and forth working that same knit stitch. So you get that fundamental feeling and muscle memory for the knit stitch, but with the chunkier yarn and the size of the project, you finish it. It's a little bit more accomplishable. So that's the project I like to start people out with. If that's too much though, sometimes a simple washcloth is another great quick win. So you get that knowledge, the familiarity, wow, with the stitch, and then can go on and progress to something else. So in a following video, I will show you how to work this knit stitch. I'll also show you how to work its opposite or inverse or mirror stitch called the purl stitch, and we'll go from there. I'm really excited that you're here and that you're knitting with me. I want to get to know you better. If you have any questions, make sure you ask them in the comments, or you're always welcome to get in touch with me through my website. That's knittinginthepark.com. On Instagram, it's Knitting in North Park, and on Facebook, it's Knitting in the Park. Again, so please get in touch with me. Subscribe so that you get the following videos and any new content that I share. Eventually, we're going to work up to cables and all kinds of different things together. So I'm really glad that you're embarking on this great journey, and I'm excited to be a part of it. So thank you.